Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the latest instalment of our Airability Inspirability Talks. The sun is shining and we've all got a real glimmer of hope as we move forward into spring, that we can all get back into the cockpit and enjoy flying again. So with that optimism, it's my pleasure today to bring to you another talk. Once again, we've creamed the top of our aviation colleagues in the UK, and today is a real corker. But just a quick reminder as to why we're here. What's brought us here is our wonderful charity Airability, and the need for everybody to be connected in the virtual world and to enjoy aviation tales and to hopefully come back together again physically and continue to do the same thing. So you can remember you can like, comment and share these talks. You can also stream these episodes as a podcast on Spotify, Apple Music and other platforms. So it's not just today. You don't miss out if it's just today that you've not managed to see this talk. You can see these talks or listen to these talks at your convenience. Do please remember the charity's coffers. We're doing these talks to remind everybody that we do need to keep the funding in place to keep the charity moving. So you can find us and donate some money through our website, a little or as much as you wish, to keep the wonderful work of Airability alive. Okay, well, I promised you we have a real corker today, and we are going to be talking to Tim Orchard. Now, some of you may have heard Tim's name with his days with British Airways as a Concorde pilot, but you also may have come across Tim with his brilliant support of Airability in terms of one of the aircraft we operate, the Tecnam. But let me just give you a bit of background on Tim, just to set the context. So Tim started his flying career in 1971 and has flown over 50 types, including balloons, parachuting, helicopters, airships, you name it. Tim has done it, tens of thousands of hours, predominantly flying for British Airways, but also many other types in private hands and across general aviation. As I said, most notably on Concorde, he was a first officer on Concorde and then moved into the captain's seat. But topping and tailing that was some time spent flying the board of directors and the chairman of British Airways in an executive aircraft. He's flown the 777, the Trident, and retired out of British Airways to enjoy a career in business, and has done many things. He's run flying schools, been the managing director of Wickham Air Park, and became the MD of Tecnam UK. And that's where Airability came across Tim, when he was able to provide us with our Tecnam P2002, which has just become the backbone of our training at Blackbush for Airability. But of course, we'll also talk to Tim about the twin engine version of the Tecnam aircraft, the P2006, which famously flew over London on the 29th of August in 2012 for the Paralympic opening ceremony. So if ever there was a way of advertising the Tecnam brand, perhaps that was the occasion. So Tim, welcome to the Inspirability Talk.
Hi John, thank you for having me, and good afternoon.
It's a pleasure to have you, Tim, and we've got a lot to get through today, and like every guest we have on these talks, Tim, it's always fascinating and insightful to to understand the inspiration and really the reason behind why you got into aviation. Was it an individual? Was it an occasion? Was it in the family? What brought you into aviation, Tim?
Well, first of all, John, thank you for the long introduction. I kind of rather like the introduction to go for an hour because the guy sounded fantastic. But surprisingly, it's been about me that you spoke at length, and I don't see myself in that way. I see myself still really as the 17-year-old who during school holidays and weekends, kind of voluntarily, but with a lot of pressure, had to work in his father's grocery shop. And my elder brother and sister before me, we spent weekends, holidays and so on doing that. And my brother, who was then in the Fleet Air Arm, sent a little note home from the aircraft carrier Victoria and he said, call this guy who is in charge of flying scholarship awards for the Royal Navy. So, 17-year-old said, why is that of interest to me? I have no interest in flying other than going in a Bristol freighter from Lydd to Lutuke with my parents, age 8. I don't think I'd ever been airborne. And my brother said, well, if you are awarded a flying scholarship, it'll take 3 weeks, and that's just the length of the Easter holidays from school. You won't have to work in the shop. And without a word of a lie, that is the reason that I applied for a scholarship. However, that's the beginning of as you just said, a really long story, because day one of the flying scholarship, which I fortunately was awarded, upside down, spinning, flying through cloud, flying on top of cloud, and I was hooked in less than an hour. And the rest is, as of 4 or 5 days time from now, 50 years of flying for Tim Orchard.
Goodness me, 50 years. Gosh. Now, was that flying scholarship, Tim, a Fleet Air Arm scholarship, or was it through the airlines that you were awarded that scholarship?
I was at school where the cadet force had Army, Navy and Air Force. And for, I guess, the reason of a 14-year-old with his much older brother being in the Royal Navy, I decided that I would opt for the Royal Navy cadets at school, and it was through that cadet force and, as I say, the auspices of my brother, I applied for a scholarship. It was actually through the Royal Air Force system. We went to Biggin Hill to be put through the selection procedure, and I don't know, can't really remember very much about it, but we built bridges across the gymnasium as if it was a waterway, and you had to pretend to lead and so on and so forth. And I'm sure that it was only due to the fact that there were the people much worse than me that I was one of those that was awarded the scholarship that year. But therein lies the beginning of a fantastic time, I have to say.
And that's a very humble story there, and I think that many of us can relate to that. The one episode, or that point at which we got hooked into the career that we all enjoy today, in aviation at least. So where did that take you then, Tim? That scholarship award, did that set your sights on British Airways? Did you had that as an ambition?
I was running up to A levels, and fortunately I was doing sciences and maths in A level, so that kind of ticked a few boxes in terms of looking for a sponsorship for an airline. And I applied to as many airlines as I could worldwide, and 2 came back basically with a selection offer. One was BEA, which rapidly became British Airways before I joined, and the second obscurely was El Al, the Israeli airline. They offered me to go to Tel Aviv for a selection, and right at the bottom of about 8 or 9 pages of introduction description about what would happen at my selection day, it did say, and of course it will be, the interview will be in Hebrew, which must be fluent. So I rapidly found a way of writing a no thank you letter, and put all my eggs into the basket of what was then the College of Air Training at Hamble, the British Airways Training School. Fortunately, got through that again, probably because I was with others who were slightly worse than me, and then there was a long wait. The initial course was delayed, and then when I went through the 2-year course after that, there were no jobs, so I went into industry doing things in the medical field, and I got a flight instructor rating to keep my hand in, and each of the downers that I found during either selections or job interviews, or failures to get in somewhere or whatever, or the market being not ideal for a pilot's job, each of those downers has actually been a great bonus, because it's forced me into looking at other things. And I have to say, I'm one of those characters who finds a door and tries to push it open rather than wait for one to come along that's already open. And as you alluded to, I've pushed a number of doors and ended up in a number of places, for example, flying the chairman around, which otherwise wouldn't just come running towards you. You have to go and look after it, look for it.
Yeah, and you know, Tim, I have to say, just turning to variability briefly, that's a great metaphor for those that you know, make that decision to come to us, because for some it's a big step, you know, and I think that proactiveness and that sort of self-starter character in you, I think, will probably chime with many folks listening today. So so obviously you're at handball, the training begins. What aircraft were you training on at the time, Tim? Obviously a totally different environment to what occurs today, very much simulator focused.
Yes, it was all hands-on stuff. It was a couple of years for the course, and it centred on the PA-28 Cherokee, four-seater, single-engine, 180 horsepower trainer, with a certain amount of aerobatics and a chipmunk. I was very fortunate because my instructor realised that I liked flying the chipmunk, and so we kind of had a bit of an unofficial deal that I would, instead of turning up at 8 o'clock for briefing, I would turn up at 8:15, which didn't give me a black mark, but it did mean that all the Cherokees had been taken, and oh dear, what a shame, I had to fly chipmunk again. So I found myself, you know, playing in a lovely tail wheel de Havilland aeroplane over the Isle of Wight solo on much more frequent occasions than perhaps the course called for. And once we'd finished the single engine work ostensibly in the Cherokee, we then flew the multi-engine phase, as one might imagine, in a commercial pilot's course, which in my case was a Beech Baron, which we had far too many hours. I think, if I remember rightly, we were allocated 70 hours, and most of us had finished at 50 or 55 hours. So, there was a kind of a lovely occasion where my flying buddy and me said to the instructor at the end of our multi-engine course, having done our commercial test and our instrument rating test, hey, we've each got, I don't remember, 10 hours or something left to fly. What do we do? And for some silly reason, he said, well, choose somewhere and take the airplane and come back when you've used up the hours. I don't think he actually thought we were going to go. I don't think he actually thought we were going to go to Amsterdam for the night, but we did.
Wonderful. So that's an assumption on my part, but is that perhaps what led you to owning your own chipmunk later on in life? I mean, I flew the chipmunk. It's a beautiful airplane. It's an honest, delightful aircraft to fly. Would I be right in saying that's probably what sparked your ownership of your chipmunk?
Yes, much later, in fact, but yes, absolutely that. And you know, one of the things after I got an instructor rating was that I did quite a number of C of A air tests, which I kind of fell into by accident. And so I found myself flying lots of airplanes that I'd never flown before, just reading the book and trying to make sure that the airplane performed to the book. But I did find that every time there was a tail-wheeled airplane or an open-top airplane available, you know, Orchard's name went on the list first and foremost. And when the Air Force decided to sell most of its chipmunks, I think it kept 2 or 3 if I remember, I sought advice as to, you know, do you think it's the sensible thing for me to do? Because I'd never owned an airplane before. And a couple of close colleagues, a couple of mates and I decided to go to the auction, and we bought a chipmunk, which after the other 2 lads fell off out of the group, I ended up being sole owner of, and I kept it actually until last year. I had it for 22 years.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Well, just darting back to the 70s, clearly the training worked. Where did you go? What was your you know, your first strike with passengers? How did you make that move from the training environment onto the line? How did it work in those days?
It ought to have worked, where the guy came from London to the college and said, okay guys, you graduated yesterday and next week you're going to go on to, in those days, Vanguards or Viscounts or Tridents or 707s. But the guy did come down wearing lots of his gold braid and said, chaps, well done for all passing, and you know, you've got a frozen ATPL sitting there in your pocket eventually. There are no jobs for a year, so go away and we'll see you in a year. Which was, you know, kind of a shock to young kids, really. We'd had no warning of it whatsoever until that moment. And some of my colleagues went off to work in their dad's butcher's shop, and some went around the world on a shoestring. I decided that I would do something I might be interested in if flying ever fell over, which was a medical profession. So for a year, I taught anaesthetists in operations in theatre how to use bits of equipment. And I'm sure that I didn't know anything about them either then or now. But I think you might have seen that I've got a good line of BS that comes out whenever it needs to, and worked my way through that until BA said, okay, it's a year, come up to Heathrow. So all of us went up to Heathrow, and they said, great, so you're a library clerk, you're a computer programmer, you're a whatever. And we said, no, sir, we're pilots, we're a year out of school, and you have promised us a pilot's job today. And he said, no, you'll have to grow up and understand what the contract says. It says we'll give you a job in a year. We didn't say what sort of job. So knockdown number 2, there we were a year after leaving college, and our instant ratings and so on had all expired, and so still no flying job. So I thought, well, I can't really carry on not flying for and letting my skills disappear, even if I had any worth talking about. So I took an instructor rating course quickly, and spent the next 12 months instructing. It was the summer of 1976, the very hot summer, if those of old enough to remember such thing. And I amassed quite a number of hours in lots of different aeroplanes, obviously at somebody else's expense of learning at my, I guess, not very well developed skills. But then eventually the Trident course, as you mentioned, came along, and we went into ground school, which was chalk and talk, and I think they maybe have progressed to an overhead projector with a slide on it occasionally, but basically a blackboard, teaching us about AC voltage and what you had to do if one of the 3 motors stopped and so on, and then put us in a simulator, which wasn't very sophisticated. It looked a bit like a Trident flight deck, but nothing like as representative as today's very functional airplane simulators. And then miraculously, after doing a couple of days of circuits in an empty airplane at Prestwick, which not everybody does base training anymore, but that used to be the fun thing, I found myself flying a 144 seat airplane with a captain and another co-pilot. Absolutely bizarre.
Fantastic.
I remember walking. My very first trip was to Amsterdam, which is a very short trip out of Heathrow. Tiny piece of water for a fast airplane. Bearing in mind the Trident was the fastest commercial airliner until Concorde came along.
Right.
And I don't think my mental plot. I don't think I'd reached the end of the takeoff in my head when we were already on the approach at Amsterdam. It was far too fast and far too whizzy for me. Bearing in mind, of course, that it had then been 3 years since I'd last flown anything sensible, which was a Beech Baron, under the guise of anyone teaching. Although I'd done some instructing, of course, it was baby stuff and circuits rather than any commercial flying. So it was a heck of a shock, I have to say. But I enjoyed it immensely, and the systems are such, and they're the same today, that it's piecemeal and it's spoon feeding, and very rapidly you get experience and you understand things, and it becomes routine and done by rote, and not many things go wrong on a regular basis, so it becomes pretty simple, and a source of immense joy, thinking, I'm driving home to see the wife and the young child, and I've just been twice across Europe and back this morning. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, tell me about the aeroplane itself, because there was quite a few innovations that came with that aircraft design, but also its operation. To give us a flavour of how I suppose ahead of its time it was in those days.
Well, I think a little bit of hardware history is worth saying, that Hawker Siddeley came out with an airplane which you'd hoped an airline would buy, and BEA looked at it and said, oh, well, it's far too big, let's have a smaller one. So Hawker Siddeley scratched their head and chopped a bit out of it and made it smaller, which BEA then bought some of, and within a few weeks, maybe I'm metaphorically using weeks, but within a short period of time, BA said, "Oh, this is great, it's fantastic. Can we have a bigger one?" So they stretched it back up again from a Trident 1 to a Trident 1E to a Trident 2 to a Trident 3, added an extra engine. So your Trident had 4 engines, and they were very underpowered, but they were innovative, as you said. And despite the fact they were British made, which is heavy, Mr. Boeing learnt from that and made much lighter machinery, and Airbus has followed that. But things made of brick and Tridents are pretty much the same model. And it was interesting that Trident was the first commercial airliner to embody auto land, and the good old chaps at Farnborough and Bedford did lots of innovative work in getting almost steam-powered autopilot systems, triplex systems, to learn what the airplane was going to do from about 200 feet downwards and replicate it. And as long as it was calm weather, and that normally happens when it's foggy, it's calm. So if it was foggy and calm, and if the airport had the right equipment, you could plug the automatic system in, and it would drive itself down and stay on the center line and flare at the right height and close the throttles and steer down the center line. I did on one particular day go into Europe and back twice, and the only thing I saw was runway center line lights on all 4 sectors. So for its age and for its time, it was way ahead. And of course, with European foggy weather, it was the leader, which everyone has followed suit since.
Yeah, quite. And so you obviously had a few years on the Trident, Tim. Where did you end up after that? What was the path, and how did you get the next type?
Again, an ill wind that blows anyone no good, if that's the phrase. I drove into work one day and I saw that some of the Tridents, which I'd recently been flying, were being cut up and thrown away, literally cut up by blow torches, acetylene torches on the apron, and being thrown away. And it was fairly obvious that BA had decided to buy some Boeing 737 airplanes. And I thought, oh, that's great, because I'm going to go onto a more modern airplane, to get a letter in my pigeonhole, along with my colleagues, to say, well, chaps, we're moving from 3 pilot airplanes to 2 pilot airplanes. Guess what? That means a third of your fleet, in terms of pilot numbers, isn't required anymore. And Tim Orchard, would you like to be a computer programmer or a library clerk or a steward? I thought, oh, God, here we have been again. So Orchard went home to think about it for a while. And still being extremely young and naive, but with a lot of bottle, I wrote the chairman a letter. And he was a new chairman. He'd just been appointed by Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister. His name was Sir John King, later to be Lord King, of course. And I said, I see that you live in Leicestershire and you have a Bentley and you drive to London every Monday morning, every Friday afternoon. Rather than me being a library clerk, maybe I could fly you up and down the country and save you time, because that'll give you benefit in looking after our ailing business. I mean, he was appointed by the Prime Minister in order to try and get rid of some of the working practices of 2 fairly top-heavy former nationalised industries, BEA and BOAC, and some of those procedures and mindsets needed to be changed. And I mean, how would a young chap, I can't remember how old I was then, 21 or something, write to the chairman and be so abjectly pointed and rude? But that was the beginning of 10 years of, well, more than 10 years, but fantastic friendship. I was embodied into his family fold. I was at his house quite often. I went out with him and his family an awful lot. We did all sorts of things, off duty and on duty. And basically for 9 years, I was no longer a Trident pilot or a BA mainline driver, but I flew him and whatever he wanted to do in a series of airplanes. Initially, I borrowed an airplane to prove the concept, and then we went out and bought some different airplanes. So again, another ill wind that blows nobody any good. And I learned an awful lot about industry, about politics, about life in the royal household, moving some of the royalty members around, and members of the House of Lords and House of Commons and SAS people. I did such a fantastic number of things. And it was during this time that one of your airability colleagues and I really sort of hit it off. One of your flight instructors, Nick Glover, whom I'd known for a long time. I saw that Nick was moving from his ground-based job at Heathrow, looking after executive airplanes, and he was heavily going into ATPL exams and instrument ratings and needed lots of flying hours and so on. So we manoeuvred to put Nick onto the King Air airplane with me, and Nick would be a driver of the airplane on empty legs and a helper to me to add comfort for the VVIPs who are often there en masse. Didn't want to be there just with a single crew driving in case something went wrong. So Nick got a bit of experience there, which was a leg up for him. I had some comfort of having somebody with me and some friendship, and we did quite a lot of that. So for 9 years, I flew the chairman and the board members around and heard them carry on a board meeting in the airplane. I learned all sorts of things that I shouldn't have learned. all sorts of ways that big industry does things, and board meetings happen before they happen, and people make decisions before they're announced. And it was quite an eye-opener for a young lad like me, I have to say.
Yes, no, quite. And I never knew that you and Nick met so long ago. That's a lovely story, and it must have been quite, as you say, eye-opening. For you to experience that, at that stage in your career. So what then, Tim? Where did you end up from that point?
I will come to that, John, but if I could just say one more thing about Nick. We met actually some years earlier than that, when I was embarking upon an air race in a light twin-engine airplane from Paris to New York and back to Paris. And I needed lots of help at Heathrow. And good old Nick, whom I'd met, he was in charge of rostering for Trident pilots at that time. And Nick put me in touch with lots of people in British Airways who would do some engineering work eventually for me and do some flight planning. And Nick was instrumental, I have to say, in me managing not to come first in a race of 100 airplanes, but at least fourth in the race. And I owe a lot to Nick in many ways, and it's great that Nick now puts something back into helping other people in airability. That's what it's all about, I think. So, but I will answer your question, John. Sorry. There was a political move within the BA board who said, "Oh, look, we've got this airplane, and although it saves money in executive time and it doesn't really cost much to run, basically both engines were like an APU of a TriStar size and shape, so they were costing nothing to run compared to the BA mainline fleet." But somebody in the board said, "Oh, well, what if the shareholders get onto the fact that we've got money enough to fly an executive airplane? We've got hundreds of our big airplanes flying around. Maybe we shouldn't have a small airplane." So again, a little story. The chairman said to me on the quiet, as he and I often did, "Find a way that we don't have to get rid of my airplane." So I put a very small one-liner advert in some obscure publication in Phoenix, Arizona, saying executive airplane for sale. I think that's all I put, and my phone number, expecting never to get a phone call. But at least we could say to the board, it's been advertised for sale. How naughty was that? Fortunately, Lord King is no longer around, and you won't get told off for it. And a guy who has become a great friend, my friend Al Gradigan, happened to be a Beechcraft dealer in Phoenix, Arizona, happened to be looking for a nearly new Beech King Air 300 model with all the toys on it that we had and special leather seats and so on and so forth. And he phoned and said, "I'll have it, bring it to America." Pretty tricky to say no when that comes. So I went cap in hand to the BA board and said, "I'm afraid I've found a buyer." So off across the Atlantic went the aeroplane back from where I'd originally collected it, and I've been friends with that dealer and still am. I was emailing with him yesterday. So again, every turn was has been a source of great experience, or new friends, or new experience, new facets in my aviation life. That's great.
Yes, it is about the network.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So the chief pilot BA, whom of course, as a lowly chap I'd never met, called me and said, the chairman tells me you're coming back into mainline. You obviously haven't been flying anything for 10 years or so, and you've only done about 4 years on Trident, so I've no idea what airplane we can put you on. If you had a free choice, Orchard, what would you have? And he had sitting on his desk a model of Concorde. And, full of my normal bullshit, I said, well, that's the only thing I want to fly. So, have we got a horrible noise? Are we okay?
No, we're good. I'm just going to turn this off. Sorry, Tim, go ahead. Yeah.
So I said, well, actually, I'd like to fly Concorde. He said, oh, no. He said, you can't do that. He said, what's the highest you've been flying in your King Air thing? About 2,000 feet? I said, no, 35,000. He said, oh. He said, have you been to more than, let's say, half a dozen destinations? I said, well, in the last 10 years of the chairman, I've probably been to 60 or 70 destinations. It's, well, it doesn't do many knots, does it? What, does he do 100 knots? And I said, no, it's probably 3 times that, if you look at it properly with dry speed. Oh, really? And it only has 1 engine, does it? I said, no, generally it has 2. And he said, we'll give you an assessment and see if you can still fly. We'll give you some senior people to go and talk to and to go into a simulator and see if you're good enough to fly something. But you'll never fly the Concorde. I said, okay, fine. So I went home to be found that I had an interview with the Concorde fleet and a ride in their simulator, and I was taken straight in, which was one of the very, very best things that's happened to me so far.
Yeah, that's fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So what's the in terms of Concorde, this is a lovely open question, Tim, and I think we can all sit back and just listen to the music. But with the move to Concorde, what were your thoughts? What were your feelings? Where did that sit with you personally and your family? And because I think for everybody who has a love of aviation, that's it must be a privilege, to have moved into those echelons of the company. So take us back to that moment and the first time you flew the airplane.
Well, I think before flying the airplane, I think disbelief surrounded me for about 9 months. I couldn't believe that I had been accepted onto the fleet. I couldn't believe that the chaps, and they were all chaps before Barbara joined us, that the chaps were so friendly and so helpful and accommodating and welcoming into kind of a tight little squadron. I mean, there weren't many guys who flew it, and everyone knew each other really, really well. They knew everybody's wife and their girlfriend and so on. And they were very tightly knit, but welcoming they were. And I mean, everyone had a nickname. I instantly got a nickname of Lord Orchard because I'd been flying with Lord King. And they thought I was a management mole because I had a management title, having run the airfield at Booker, and I'd been with the board members on a daily basis. So, but actually, delightful and extremely helpful. I mean, I just had a mindset that I would never get through the ground school, and I would never get through the simulator, and I didn't think I'd ever manage the route flying because it was, potentially an uphill struggle. Most of the guys had done 20 years in the airline. I had done 4 years flying a Trident, which seemed to be ages ago, and 10 years flying, a fairly easy to operate light twin exec airplane. I thought I had a huge mountain to climb, but the fleet helped me to climb it, and there was nothing but support. And I have to take my hat off to the chaps who were the trainers. But the training was in terms of length, massive. the 777 course, if I remember, was 10 days of simulator and 8 or 9 days of ground school.
Well, I think we may have lost Tim there on his Wi-Fi. So what I'll do is we'll just hang on for a moment, and Tim's back again. Tim, there you are.
Good. I don't know where I went. Sorry.
That's okay.
Anyway,
no problem.
My ugly mug up here. So Trident, a Concorde course, which was a shock to me, having thought about how long it took a Trident course or a 777 course, was 6.5 months. And basically Monday to Friday we were locked into a hotel, and we worked all day and we worked all night, and it was extremely time consuming. And again, chalk and talk, no computer aided learning by then. Simulator was pretty good. It had motion and so on, but it didn't represent the airplane anything below about 100 feet. But it was just a lot to do. I mean, Concorde was an extremely sophisticated and complicated airplane. It was a subsonic airliner and a supersonic bomber and a fighter, and it just happened to have people behind you, but you had to learn an awful lot about it. And guys ahead of me and guys after me, they've done it. It's not rocket science, maybe it is, but it's not insurmountable. But boy, was it a lot to learn. And I have to say that from where I had recently been, it was a steep curve, but a fantastic airplane at the end of it. And who wouldn't put all the effort in and spend all the time to learn and to put some skill in, or learn the skills, if that wasn't the airplane at the end of it? There've been plenty of guys ahead of me, both captains, co-pilots and first officers, who haven't got through the course. And I suspect really because they just thought that the reward at the end of it wasn't enough. I mean, any guy could do it. It's just a question of, did you want to stay the course? And
yes.
Sitting in the airplane for the very, very first time at Heathrow to take an empty airplane to Prestwick to go and do some circuits, I was just utterly shocked at the acceleration. I mean, taking your hand off the throttles to put it on the stick during the takeoff run, your hand just rocketed back down the aisle. The rate of acceleration was phenomenal, particularly in a nearly empty airplane going to Prestwick. But 4 or 5 days of circuits, day and night, and on 3 engines and 2 engines and 4 engines, and with or without stuff going wrong, and engineers behind you playing silly buggers to see if you'd notice. And it was, I don't know, overwhelming in some ways, unbelievable joy and giggle factor in others. But the route flying was just astonishing. Every single time we went flying, we loved it. Every single time, I think, over all of the period that I was on the airplane, almost every time apart from 10 or 11 times a day, that's a Trident, by the way, not a Concorde.
We'll have to give Chad a bad mark there for his extra knowledge. Don't worry.
You only see him if I'm awake. But we were having to deal with something every time. It was great. Either an air conditioning failed, or an engine failed, or we had a low oil pressure, or the pressurization wasn't working, or a hydraulic system went off, or something. It was great. And that sort of stuff really, that's better. That sort of stuff really keeps my interest up, and having to do stuff and make proper decisions and decide whether you're going to go somewhere or turn back or throw fuel out, or how many engines have you got left at this time of day, and so on and so forth. That's really a fantastic bonus, as well as flying the world's only successful supersonic airliner, and as well as doing a mile every 2 3/4 seconds, and as well as being 11 miles high, and as well as getting across the ocean and back in a day if you wanted to, and as well as meeting VVIPs and royalty and captains of industry and politicians and pop stars. on a real daily basis and rubbing shoulders with him and inviting him to the flight deck. And just, what more can you do? What more can you have other than that? I think if I were to ask that question seriously, space shuttle will be the only other thing that I can think that would top it with somebody with my level of aviation interest. But no, it was a huge privilege to be able to fly that airplane.
I have no doubt, Tim, and that's a really lovely to hear. Well, just turning to the airplane, obviously there was a lot of research done for the design. There was the Handy Page HP 115 that looked at the slender wing design, and then there was the Fairy Delta. I don't know if that was to do with Concorde, but
John, you cut out, so I'll carry on as if I think I heard your question. Yeah, I mean, I was very fortunate getting on the airplane after it became an airliner, of course. The guys who did the real work were the flight test pilots, the flight test engineers, the designers, and so on and so forth. And it was designed in the 50s and still flew in the 1950s and still flew in the 21st century. And it did 27 years of supersonic service with passengers. But the people, and in fact, I know one of the guys personally who flew the 117 and the Fairy Delta 2 and so on, perfecting slender delta wing design and seeing what happens if, and thinking about an airplane that gets so hot as Concorde did by flying at Mach 2. The airplane stretched by about 10.5 inches in length. So just imagine you design a hydraulic system or an electrical system or whatever, and it's got to put up with the fact that its cables or its pipes or whatever you're talking about have to stretch and they have to contract again every flight. And you put the floors on rollers and the windows on rollers, and you put concertina bits in the hydraulic pipes and loops in the cables and so on. And it's the guys who went through the thought processes and the development and the design that have to have hats taken off, as far as I'm concerned. And the next set of guys were the test pilots who spent 6 years flying the airplane around, trying to see what would happen if, and going up to the highest they can to wait till all 4 engines flame out, and then gliding back down to an altitude where they could start at least 1 or 2 of them again. And what happens if you stop 2 engines just after takeoff? And they did so much. It was the world's most tested airplane when it was thrown to the airline pilots, who basically think, okay, so it's an airplane and we'll fly it like any other. I mean, it had some peculiarities, as you might imagine. But basically all the hard work had been by the guys before the airline pilots, and they must have had an immense joy and thrill to decide to try something or test something or take something off or add something in or whatever. We just got the benefit of all of that.
Yeah. And did you ever get to meet the likes of Brian Trubshaw or Andre Toucat, the test pilots of the aircraft? And what were your conversations? How did that feel for you?
Yes, I was privileged to meet Brian Trubshaw a number of times. I was doing some airshow work myself in some in various airplanes, and quite often Brian Trubshaw will be head of safety or in charge of air displays and so on. And I had the great privilege to meet Brian on a number of occasions, even to the extent that he would have me in his circle and chat with, which, he was a very popular man and always very busy. So I found that a great privilege. But he had a great sense of humor, I have to say. Do we have time for a little story about him?
Oh, absolutely.
I was engaged in conversation with him on nothing in particular at Farnborough, actually, just prior to one of the air shows. And he and I were chatting about nothing in particular when someone unknown to either of us, it appeared, walked up, looked at Brian's label on his chest, which said Captain Brian Trubshaw. I mean, as if he needed a label. And he said, Mr. Trubshaw, in the ring road around Bristol in, I think, 1957, I rolled my Austin 7 into a ditch, and you, sir, pulled me out and took me to hospital, and I've never had a chance to say thank you. And Brian looked at him and said, I wasn't in Bristol in 56 or 57. And this guy said, oh, I'm sorry, and ran off. And I said to Brian, how could you remember instantly where you were? He said, well, it probably was me. He said, but I didn't like the way he didn't know my name.
And I just wonder the number of occasions, though, on the M25, as it later became, or other roads close to runway thresholds, that you know, may have had a little bit of chaos owing to a full reheat departure from Concorde. But no, that's a lovely story. And sorry, go on.
Yeah, one of the great benefits of that the airline pilots got from the flight test program was that they never bothered to certify the airplane to take off without reheats. So whatever weight we were, we would have reheats on. We needed 3 generally, but 4 for a heavyweight airplane. And therefore we were always going to make noise for takeoff. And of course, all the car alarms in the car parks would go Concorde, 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 as we set them off as we flew over them. And I have to say, with a lightweight airplane, so not Atlantic fuel, but you know, air show fuel or domestic fuel, if we used full power and 4 reheats to take off, we would have a phenomenal machine in our hands. And typically, I'll give you another example of what the airplane could do, despite it being an airliner. With 100 people on going on an air show day, we took off from Heathrow, and instead of doing the normal throttling back at the right number of seconds after takeoff and scraping off the end of the runway at a couple of 100 feet, as you would see on our Atlantic trip, I, through a friend of mine who was in air traffic, arranged for an unlimited altitude clearance after takeoff to see how high I could get above the ground by the end of the runway. I'll give your viewers just a few seconds to think that maybe at the end of the runway at Atlantic weight, we'll get a couple of 100 feet high. Okay, on this day at airshow weight, coming out of Heathrow with 100 passengers, we leveled off at the end of the runway at 6,000 feet.
Goodness me, gosh, incredible, incredible! What a machine!
Yeah.
In terms of memories, Tim, and stories, I have to ask you. Let's do it like this: your top 3 magical moments on the aeroplane, because you know you've done formation flying with the Red Arrows. Clearly, the record-breaking flight, Tim, must be up there from New York to Heathrow, the fastest time between the 2 cities. Give us your 3 magical moments.
Oh boy!
I'm sorry.
First of all, I think I need 5 years' notice for the question. Second of all, how can you bring it down to 3? Because every time we flew the airplane was magical. But I think, I mean, the world record of the shortest time between New York and London is of course held by the crew, 3 of us in the flight deck. I have to say it was my idea, and I planned it for a while, and it needed a few ducks in order. And I can't tell you how we managed to break the record so conclusively, because my then boss Mike is still around and still alive, and he still doesn't know. So that's still a bit of a giggle, and Captain Les Scott and I are the only 2 know really exactly what we did. But I mean, that of course is a magical thing. But it was just a one-off and so on, and it's there in the record. But it was kind of an ordinary trip with just a few bits added. But I do think, you know, flying next to 9 red airplanes, or flying across the Atlantic where you lose an engine, then you lose another engine, and then you have to decide, well, the book says we haven't got enough fuel to reach anywhere. That's a bit tricky. What should we do? I think those things are pretty magical. But overall, as a package, I think flying what I would still think is the world's most prestigious aeroplane, and flying it for BA and flying it for Britain, and meeting the Madonnas and Paul McCartneys of this world on a regular basis. I think those are the main memories that I take home. Just pure and simple privilege. That's all, as far as I can see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that anyone looking in, reading the books, watching the documentaries, listening to this, can see that the aircraft itself afforded the crew you know, all of these magical moments and memories. What's it like hanging in there in formation with other Concordes or the Red Arrows? I mean, you know, how did the aircraft handle? Obviously, that's, you know, a very sort of a lot of finesse required, and you know, small movements on the throttles and the yoke. How did that work?
Um, I have to say, I don't think I'm doing my colleagues a disservice, but as gradually the former Royal Air Force pilots fell off into retirement or whatever, the skill level of the average airline pilot in terms of formation flying went with it. And I think it's fairly true to say that not many airline pilots nowadays flying for big airways or other companies are either current or skilled formation flyers. And to that end, that's a perfect photograph, thank you. You can see there that if the Concorde did something daft or accidental, 9 airplanes could just peel off in their normal get out of jail free card and not hit anything. They could all just go left or right appropriately. We used to have the Concorde behind the Red Arrows sitting inside the V, with the baby Red Arrow that's sitting at the bottom of the photograph in the center there leading, and Concorde would be inside the V. And you can imagine that if the Concorde turned left or right, it would take out 4 or 5 Red airplanes. When the then leader of the Arrows that particular year decided that he didn't think big airways could put up someone with sufficient current practice of formation flying, they changed the formation from the Concorde being at the back where it could do damage to the Concorde leading where everybody could see it. And I think at that point the skill level was noticed by BA, and each time that I was involved with the Red Arrows and Concorde, a particular pilot who was a CAA chief chap who had lots of formation flying in lots of aeroplanes, who also happened to be the Concorde representative for the CAA, he would come and sit in the seat, and his formation flying skills were great because he was ex-Air Force, he had lots of practice and so on. And instantly, kind of a blow to the head as far as I could see, he said, these engines are far too unresponsive at the sort of speed that we want. I'll just throttle 2 of them back and just use 2 of them. And we all looked at each other, why didn't we think of that?
Yeah.
But there you go. That's the guys who have the experience, they have the skill, they have the knowledge. And so I don't think it's wrong to say his name. Jock Reed, Captain Jock Reed, he flew the aeroplane with us once a month, and he would sit in the seat quite often when there was a formation flight going, and he would sit left seat or right seat, and one of our other chaps would sit in the other seat. But I have to say, of those of whom I observed flying the aeroplane in formation, Jock had the best skill.
Yeah, that's lovely to hear. Really, really interesting. Now, you and I spoke last week, and you mentioned a day that will sit in your memory for a long time when you took Concorde to Fairford to the Riyadh Air Show, put it on the ground, but then flew something else. Tell everybody that story. I think it's just wonderful.
Well, I'm a peculiar chap in as much as I generally wasn't happy just to have one job. And Big Airways had, a nice pilot roster ahead of time, whichever fleet I was on, and one could plan one's days off fairly accurately. This particular period of time, I was doing some airshow work in some other aeroplanes, and it happened that I had an invite to fly a small airplane in the Riyadh Air Show at Fairford. And it also came up that on the option list was to do a charter that Saturday or Sunday, whichever it was, which was a Concorde charter out of Heathrow, landing at Fairford, spending the day, and then taking another set of passengers out of Fairford back round the Bay of Biscay to Heathrow. So 200 passengers got supersonic circle, and we got a day free at the air show. But why waste a day free at the air show if you can go flying? So long story short, I climbed down the steps of the Concorde at Fairford, having not very discreetly changed from my BA uniform into my green suit and leather helmet, got into a World War I aeroplane, did an air show, not very much, of course, in an old string bag at Fairford. And then at the end of the day, redonned my co-pilot's uniform and sat in the right-hand seat and flew the airplane out. So what better way to go and do your air show than there and back in a supersonic airliner?
Absolutely, what a story. No, there's lots of smiling faces, I'm sure. Now that's and I was probably there. I've frequented REAC many occasions, as I'm sure all the viewers have, and will very dearly miss Concorde, of course, you know, in our skies over the UK, but also on the airshow scene. And the airplane did, of course, come to an end in 2003. Tim, what are your thoughts on that episode in our history in this country of aviation, and of course the airplane?
Well, I think it could be nothing but sadness. You know, it's a bit like the death of a loved one, isn't it? You have to celebrate their life, but you can still be sad that they're not around anymore. And that's how I feel about that airplane. I mean, it performed incredibly well and did a very, can you say very unique? Anyway, it did a unique job. It took people supersonically very safely for 27 years. And it hasn't been matched either up to that time or since. And although in some years' time we may go 5 times the speed of sound to Australia in 4 hours, I think that seriously will happen. But we've gone backwards, you know, 1,350 miles an hour to 600. That shouldn't really happen, should it? And it was taken out of service for some very strange political reasons. I don't think I should go into it whilst I have TV camera in front of me, but it's been written about plenty. And you know, there's the good old BA line which says it was taken out of service at the right time for the right reasons, which says nothing. But it was taken out of service because of French politics. It was still making money. It was still safe. There had been one accident, but there are very few airplanes around that haven't had an accident of its type on the fleet in some way or other. And if you look at the first of the accident reports written after the French disaster in July 2000 in Paris, it gives you an awful lot of reasons to realise why that happened. And they weren't related to the airplane, they were related to the stuff around it and the people, I'm afraid. And we went flying after that. We modified the airplane and we went flying. Gulf War II, 9/11 in the USA, all those things happened just at the same time as Concorde came back into service, and fewer people were travelling on it, and therefore it didn't look exactly the same as it did in terms of passenger numbers and frequency as before the crash. The French didn't want to fly it anymore. They scared themselves silly several times after the French crash by putting people on the airplane who were not as experienced as the previous sets of crew. They'd sent a lot of them home and didn't expect to come back. But we still had everyone, all of the seats in the front of a British Airways Concorde. Every guy there had at least 20 years experience as an airline pilot before they sat there. And that experience counted. And we were still flying, we were still making money. And for lots of political reasons, it was taken out of service. It had come out of service at the time. You know, it wouldn't have been flying now. It's past its sell-by date now in terms of longevity of machinery. But it could have gone on for longer, and I think that's very sad. But most of the airplanes are in museums, and most of them have got light shows, and people can walk through them. And there's lots of stuff and still happening about Concorde, and lots of books still being written, and lots of presentations still being made, and it still lives on in our hearts. There's the one at Bristol Aerospace Museum, and chaps like me who still love it still go and visit them and still give talks and presentations and sit in the flight deck and remember what the good times were like. John seems to have gone dead again. Oh dear.
I know I'm back with you. I'm back with you, Tim. If you can hear me, I'm having my fair share of Wi-Fi issues today as well. But Tim, that's a nice way to, in your career, to say that actually, you know, these aircraft do live on in
maybe I should just talk in case I'm still live. I can't see John
with British Airways
at the moment. So, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back again, Tim. Apologies for that. It's a poor Wi-Fi for me today. I assume you can still hear me now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. So, Tim, I was saying that whilst it was a sad day in 2003 when the final Concorde landed. Of course, its memory lives on in folks like yourself. The airplanes themselves are in museums, and the legacy lives on for that reason. So, for that and for your talk today, we thank you. But you moved on from British Airways, Tim, and moved into industry and continued your work outside of the cockpit. Give us a flavour of what you've been up to since the British Airways days. Obviously, Tecnam is probably the most topical of your pursuits, given the airability relationship.
Yes, as I hinted at earlier, John, I was never really satisfied having one job at once. So whilst I was in the airline, I again was fortunate enough. You can say I created it if you want to, but it says that I've run short of battery, but I don't believe it because I'm plugged in. Anyway, I have another way to skin that cat if I go off, John. My apologies for the delay.
No problem.
I manoeuvred within BA to run the British Airways Flying Club, and that was based on an airfield at High Wycombe called Booker. And so I suddenly, on my days off from flying Concordes, I found myself managing director of a company, landlord to 19 businesses, in charge of air traffic control and rescue and firefighting and the real estate and the flight school and so on and so forth. So I put my sixpenneth in and had every airplane repainted, every airplane re-engined, every airplane's upholstery and avionics changed, and tried to up the game a bit and built a new control tower and new hangars and resurfaced the runway. And fortunately, all of those little gambles, which I was kind of given enough rope to hang myself times 10, but fortunately, it kind of worked, and the airfield and the flying school went from strength to strength. But at some point, not all the things in the world can carry on, and at some point I had to stop running an airfield, and at some point I had to stop flying Concordes and go on to 777s, and at some point I had to stop 777ing as well, and putting those futures into a box. One has to think of what does one do afterwards. And I, with a bit of advice from my then chief engineer at Booker, Jerry Parr, I went off and became the UK dealer for the Italian company called Tecnam. I had a bit of an in because the professor who owned and ran the company was the same professor who assisted me when I raced across the Atlantic 40 years ago in a Partenavia. And so my relationship with him and his family kind of gave me a bit of a leg up to become the UK dealer, which I was for 9 or 10 years. And so I sold 45 aeroplanes, including, as you know, a single engine Tecnam to Airability, and the only modified airplane by an aircraft manufacturer to take those without all of the normal abilities in terms of hands and feet and arms and legs and stuff, which pilots generally have. Only airplane ever to be modified by its original manufacturer in that way. So that was another great exercise. But I first met your very kind boss, who's an immense chap, Mike Miller-Smith, because he approached me and said, hey, we want to do something for the Paralympics in 2021 London. What can you do? And being the aircraft dealer, I said, well, I've got not a spare, but a demonstrator twin here. How about we do something with that? So it's a lot of history now, isn't it? And it's a long time ago. But with Mike's push, lots of people assisted, and we put special lights on the airplane and special cameras around, and we got lots of permissions to fly an airplane with pyrotechnics falling off its wings over the Queen, over the Olympic Stadium, and open the London 2012 Paralympics in my own little baby Tecnam twin. And of course, it was again an exercise where airability does something for somebody else, because we had a guy who had just come out of the army who was trying to get himself back on the straight and narrow and fit and so on, and he got a multi-engine rating and a display rating, and so we did the display together. I mean, a fantastic exercise and a fantastic memory, and lots of people put a lot of effort and a lot of money into achieving that. And you know, one has to say thank you for all those people who allowed us to do that, and to throw the airability name up and literally in the sky. I mean, doing that low level over central London, over the Olympic Stadium, with the Queen sitting there, and getting permissions to place pyrotechnics over people's heads like that, with the safety aspects and so on, was an immense struggle for a lot of people. And basically all I did was provide the aeroplane and a bit of piloting expertise. So the hats are off really to other people. But again, another mark for airability and its prowess. Well done.
Well, and I have to say, Tim, it was a collective effort, as you say. And on my study wall here, there's a wonderful print that's got about 15, 20 signatures on it of the team that made it work. And that, I have to say, was a seminal moment in the history of the Airability charity. It really put us on the map. We were understood for what we deliver, you know, and what a stage to do it on, you know. And the picture we saw earlier was the Apollo 11 astronaut Buzz Aldrin sat in your airplane that you provided to us in 2012. So a memorable year. Well, Tim, I'm looking at the clock, and we could go on all night. It's just been absolutely fascinating and a real joy to listen to your career, your memories, and you know, your time in the air. You know, amassing what I'm sure is a lot of experience in flying hours. But I have to turn to some questions, if I may, Tim, because there's a huge amount that have come, and I am going to have to limit them. And a lot of them have been unsurprisingly focused around Concorde. So I'm going to just read up on some of them here. And here we go. Here's a good one. If given the chance to go back in time, would Mr. Orchard do things in a different manner? And is there anything he didn't achieve?
Well, Mr. MOC, no. Do you know, I don't think I would do anything differently. I have had an absolute ball, and I'm so grateful for having so many doors pushed in front of me that you know, or put in front of me that I pushed open, because I think I'll put it in perspective. I sat in a Trident as a one-ring, brand new second officer, and there was I'd been in the airline flying about 6 months or so, and there was a delay, air traffic delay or something delay, I don't remember. And I looked across at the captain and I said, "Oh, gosh, this means that our second 2 sectors of the day might disappear. We might only have to do 2 flights instead of 4 today. That's a shame." And he looked at me and he said, "Look, my lad, when you've been in it as long as I have, you want to go home as soon as you can and do as little flying as you can and take as much money as you can." He said, "I'm running an antiques business and it's far more fun than flying these airplanes." And I was just literally taken back. You know, I mean, yeah. 20 or 21 years of age, one stripe, and I thought naively that all the people in the flight deck wanted to be there. This guy had done enough. He didn't want to do anymore. And I'm just so pleased, in answer to the question, that never happened to me. I still want to go flying. I've got a Tiger Moth sitting here at home. I brought it out today in the sunshine, as sad as that can be, out of its shed. And I thought, oh, if it wasn't for lockdown, I'd love to go flying. You know, I just want to do more of it. And I've flown, you know, I've done parachuting, I've done all sorts of things we haven't even touched on. And I just like being airborne. I love it. My hobby is ballooning. You know, I can go ballooning as long as the weather's nice every day and not get bored of it. And why would I want to change what I've had? Every single minute has been a ball. So thank you for the question.
Oh, that's lovely. Okay, here's a question from Phil Wilson. What is the best and worst flight incident on Concorde? So I think we've answered the best. What was the worst?
For me, I assume he means.
Yes, probably.
I think the one that it was old technology and it was running at its limits most of the time. And hats off to the guys who made that happen. Engine failures nowadays are something that an airline pilot reads about. He practices in the simulator and most probably will never see for real. Again, because the telemetry and the electronics are so good that if anything is going to go wrong with an engine, somebody notices electronically and they take the engine off the aeroplane before it goes bang. Okay, you can say there was a 777 last year that didn't happen. It was always the exception to every rule. But contrast that with on the Concorde, I had one particular month where I had 5 separate engine failures, and it's stuff you had to deal with that type of airplane, that type of technology, that age, and so on, which is gone. People don't have to deal with it now. But losing one engine on Concorde, if you're at max weight, you had to work a bit harder and throw some fuel away to lighten it. But generally, on an en route, if you lost an engine, you might be able to continue to your planned destination, or you might divert. But that was, a fairly binary decision. But it didn't fly too well on 2 engines, and there was one occasion which I can remember every second of, where we lost an engine during our acceleration to Mach 2, and within a few seconds we lost a second engine. So obviously we didn't reach Mach 2, and we slowed down because we hadn't got enough thrust, and we descended because you can't keep up there. The air is too thin to keep up there unless you've got lots of thrust. And so we were bumbling along at 0.9 Mach number, still pretty quick, but not quick for a Concorde. And judging by the graphs, we had not enough fuel to reach any destination either side of the Atlantic. And I guess that kind of concentrates the mind a bit.
Yes.
I was giving a lecture about this one day, and some guy on the front row said, "Did you die?" Fortunately, no, we didn't. And the expertise in the flight deck was, I have to say, way higher than my intellect level. And it was quite obvious that if you can't get anywhere on 2 engines, you need more. So let's be illegal for a second and restart an engine that we've already shut down. And that got us enough bit of extra ump for a short while until we could eventually reach a piece of land, which was pretty sensible, pretty safe, and passengers are well looked after and so on. And I put that in the same box as the passenger cabin filling full of fuel fumes at 60,000 feet. People's eyes streaming, and a pipe had broken, and we were getting fuel fumes, which isn't nice. And it was moving forwards row by row at about 1 row a minute. And there's 25 rows. We had to be from 60,000 feet onto the ground within 20 minutes. And that also concentrated the mind. But good day. We got away.
Yeah. Gosh, and there's an hour's inspirability talk there for those 2 occasions, I'm sure. And as you say, those occasions where you remember every second, and they all live to tell the tale. Right, I've got a question here. You might know Nigel Foster from Hayward Aviation Insurance.
Oh, yes.
And the only reason I say that is because he starts off by saying, does Lord Orchard believe that there will be further supersonic aircraft in the foreseeable future?
Hello, Nigel. Yes, I think with the particular thought that in Britain we'll have a company called Reaction Engines Limited, and 3 guys, 2 of whom aren't there anymore sadly, but 3 guys set that company up after Margaret Thatcher gave them a bit of a leg up, and they have been trying for, I'm going to guess, 24 years, I think, to get an engine to power something at 5 times the speed of sound. And they only had one trick to fix, which they fixed a couple of years ago, and that was to get the air going into the intake not freeze. They managed to find that. They've now got extra funding from the United States, from Europe, from Britain, from governments, from other airlines, from other engine manufacturers, and locally to me in Abingdon and in Westcott, they have test beds and research and development, and they, without any doubt, in the next few years, will have an engine which will power a craft either to the space station or at Mach 5 as an airliner. And building the airframe isn't an issue. It's just bits of metal basically, but the technology is there. It is being worked on very heavily and very quickly, and we will, I think, without any doubt, in the next 10 years, see something which can go from London to Australia in 4.5 hours, refuel, and come back the same day. And it will use ordinary airport runways. It's not a rocket. It'll go at 100,000 feet altitude, 5 times the speed of sound. And I guess pilots might even be pilots to Australia and back in a day and not even need to night stop, unfortunately.
Yeah, gosh. And if we just look at what Concorde achieved in the 60s, why shouldn't that be possible? No, I think I think that's a very exciting thing to look forward to. I've got a wonderful question here, Tim, from Nadim Ahmed, and he says, I'm 52 and paraplegic. Is it too late to learn to fly?
Oh, no. 52? You're a youngster. Of course not. My goodness me. No. I mean, I don't know whereabouts you live, but without any doubt at all. I mean, apart from you enjoying it and making your life so much difficult and more rewarding and fulfilling, without any doubt at all, if you can get in the aeroplane, air ability can get you flying. Absolutely, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and that's exactly why we exist, Nadim. So that's a really good question. Now I've got a question, dealer's choice. So I'm gonna put the last one to you, Tim, and it's about ballooning. I've never had the privilege to enjoy that form of flight. How did you get into ballooning, and what do you do? Have you got your own? How often do you fly? How does it compare to flying at Mach 2?
Wow, there's lots of questions in there, John. You've learned that things happen in peculiar ways to me, and I got into ballooning very, very simple. I got married, and my then wife's father had what we would call an early hot air balloon, which was after a crash during the Harry Worth TV show, which some of the oldies might remember. Said hot air balloon was placed in a barn and not used. And I kind of fancied going ballooning, and I could see this balloon just rotting in a barn. And I basically said to my brand new father-in-law, hey, I've got this tiny bit of money. I'm not very wealthy. I'm either going to go and buy a balloon, or I'm going to buy your daughter some new clothes, some dresses or some finery or whatever. Which do you think is the best thing to do? He said, okay, I understand. Buy the clothes, borrow my balloon till you don't need it anymore. So that's what I did, and an old style balloon with lots of peculiarities and so on. But a bit like learn to drive using a vintage car. I learned all of the basics with the worst equipment, which befitted me really well for the modern kit, which is much easier and much safer. And I've had a number of balloons. I've currently got 3 balloons sitting here at home. One of which I fly without a basket, but in substitute of that is a pair of Concorde passenger seats.
Wonderful. So I knew that was coming.
Not many people fly with me because it's too scary in the passenger seats, but they're Concorde leather passenger seats, certified, because it's an aircraft seat, and we have 5-point harnesses, so 2 of us sit in it. You do have to land backwards though, otherwise your legs get chopped off when you land. But so that's one funny thing I do in ballooning. The other is my daughter and I share a balloon which is called a hopper, and that has no basket at all. Oh, there we are. There's the Concorde seats, and that's a ship's captain, my good friend Phil, and we are flying the Concorde seats under a hot air balloon off the back of his cruise ship in northern Norway. So there I was giving lectures about aviation on a cruise ship, and Phil, the captain, who happens to be a friend now, said, I wonder what we can do in northern Norway that's different. I said, I'll bring a balloon. and we flew twice off the back of his cruise ship. So that's one fun thing. And then the hopper, which is a smallish hot air balloon without a basket. So the pilot straps a tank of propane to his back, clips himself to the burner, and then you hang legs dangling free under the hopper. That's the back of the cruise ship again. And my daughter and I share this, so she and I either crew or fly it. And again, it's just fun, and it's amazing to fly across the countryside, absolutely quiet, looking at the animals, be able to listen to what people say in their gardens, brushing your feet in the tops of the trees if you want to, and a fantastically gentlemanly, very soft and gentle form of aviation.
Yeah. Well, Tim, I'm going to leave it there to place, I think, a line in the sand on that metaphor. The fact that you can just enjoy, you know, being up in the sky, and that's why we all do it. I think that, you know, that comment at the beginning of our chat about that 17-year-old still being in, you know, in you now, that's certainly how I behave as soon as I turn up to an airfield and see an aeroplane. And what a privilege it is to fly as well. And you know, it's certainly been fun, and it's been really enjoyable, Tim, learning a bit about your career and, you know, putting us in the pilot seat of some of those iconic British airplanes that you've flown. So it just leaves me to say thank you, and to leave you to your weekend finally, and at some point very soon, Tim, I and we very much look forward to seeing you again for a cup of tea at Blackbush. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me on, and thank you for proving, at least after 50 years of flying, I still have a memory to recall some of the things.
No, gosh, not at all, Tim. Cheers. Bye-bye. Well, there we have it. What a career, and I just love Tim's sense of adventure, and what an innovator as well. I don't think there's many hot air balloons that have two Concorde seats as the basket. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly had a lot of fun talking with Tim, and I do look forward to bringing you another Inspirability talk in a couple of weeks' time. You'll see that on social media very soon. We also are developing the Aurora at Home opportunity for you to view over our YouTube channel. That's coming up in March. That's going to be really interesting. And then after that, in May, we have the Armchair Air Show returning. My goodness, have we got a real treat in store for that. It's going to be raising the bar in all sorts of ways. You're going to see some more information about that coming through as well. But I will leave you to your Saturday evenings. It's been a pleasure to bring Tim and his flying experiences and flying tales, and I will talk to you soon. Bye bye.